Welcome to Family Matters. Tonight we have a really exciting program on. We're going to be talking to Paul and Judith Mudge about fostering. Paul and Judith have 3 young children of their own, and as well as bringing up their own children, they've chosen to be a blessing to many more babies and young people that have come through their home as foster children. And Paul and Judith are going to share tonight how to get involved with fostering children and the trials and the blessings that they've experienced with their family and their experiences of fostering. So yeah, this is going to be a discussion that is really exciting tonight, and we've learned a lot just having a pre-chat, haven't we?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So welcome, Paul and Judith. Good to have you with us.
Nice to be here. Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
So I thought for a reading tonight we'd do just read one verse from James, which I thought was quite appropriate. And it's from James chapter 1, verse 27, and it reads this: "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." So I thought with that introduction, welcome again.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about your family, your biological family. What children have you got, and what are their ages?
Well, as you said at the start, we've got 3. The oldest is Jacob, who is 10. Emily is 9, and Asher is 7.
Okay, so yeah, it's quite a neat family you've got. What is fostering? Let's just step right on the deep end.
We're transitional foster parents. So we work with Oranga Tamariki, previously known as SIFs. And basically our role as transitional foster parents is to give children a home if they need to be uplifted from their family for some reason, and until the long-term plan is sorted out. So in theory, ideally, Paul and I's job would be to take a child in for a weekend, maybe a week or two, just while Oranga Tamariki checks out potentially grandma and granddad or auntie and uncle and confirms that yes, this is a safe home for the child to move to, and they can move on. Because our world is slightly less than ideal, we've never had a placement that's been any shorter than 4 months.
Okay.
Usually.
What is the difference between the temporary fostering and the more long-term? It's just that the longer-term fostering is an ongoing thing, or is that a short-term thing as well?
To some degree, they overlap. As you know, we had our last little boy for 2.5 years, which definitely wasn't short term. But generally, in our case, the plan is always for the children, for a long-term plan to be established and for the children to move to a permanent home from our place. Whereas a family open to permanency, or home for life as it used to be called, would be, working on the assumption that that child was likely to stay with them forever. It sometimes doesn't work out like that, but that's the main difference. The last little boy that we had with us recently has just moved to a home for life placement where, hopefully for him, I really do hope, he'll stay there, until he's grown. They'll be his family.
Oh, lovely. So what got you into fostering? What was the motivation?
Well, we had a little bit of space at the time. At the time, we had a spare bedroom. Now we don't, but we've moved in between, and it seemed like something we could do that needed to be done. You often see things out there and think someone should do that, and kind of had a moment of realization that we are actually somebody. We could. It also seemed like a very sensible thing to do for our children. Like probably everyone here, we're ridiculously blessed in that we have so much. Our children have so much, everything they want and everything they need, and a lot of things they want. it seemed like a good way to teach them that it's our responsibility to share that with other people who need it. Like I said, at the time we had a spare bedroom. It seemed, that was something that we had available to share. And it also felt like the right thing to do morally. I was quite influenced by the fact that I know as Christadelphians, we, for example, tend to be, my own feelings on it are complex, but we tend to be anti-abortion. We think that potentially someone in the position of our last little boy's mother when she was expecting him, the right thing for her to do would be continue with that pregnancy and have him. What we often don't tend to think about is what happens then. A lot of the children born into those situations, some of them may be adopted out to loving homes, and that's wonderful. Others of them, maybe they'll just be an unexpected surprise, but their family will cope and learn to love them, and it will have a happy ending that way. But a huge portion of these babies born that were never particularly wanted aren't going to have particularly happy endings in their own families. Maybe there are some drug issues, maybe whatever the reasons are that their families struggle to cope with having a baby in the house. And I feel that we've kind of got some kind of responsibility to help those children out. If we feel they should be here, we owe it to them to look after them when they are.
Yeah. So is there quite a need to have people who are prepared to do what you're prepared to do?
There seems to be plenty of children in foster care. I have a good friend who does drug addict, like her main specialty is looking after drug addicted babies. They come to her when they're usually very newborn, usually very, very addicted to whatever substances their mothers were using at the time. And it's rare for her not to have a baby in her house.
Okay.
Yep.
And that must be very challenging to deal with babies with such special needs.
Yeah, she's a very special person, and she has a very flexible job, and she works from home, and she's very used to a lot of crying. She's a baby wearing consultant. She just pops the babies in a sling and walks around with them, and she's a wonderful person, and what she does is incredible. But yeah, our last little boy, who I know most people here I think have met, I'm not naming him on purpose because this recording will be out there. Our last little boy, he was born very, very addicted to drugs, and she said he just screamed for 3 days solid, would hardly take a bottle. They were about to take him to hospital to put him on a drip when he finally decided to calm down a little and take a bottle, but it's something else.
And how did you find that? Because you obviously had him for 2.5 years. How did that work for you as far as the addictions and things went?
Well, we didn't get him till 10 months old, so he had been, well weaned off that by then. And in general, there was didn't appear to be any obvious side effects. I'm sure there's probably was or could and still could be, but he was a pretty normal little boy, which was very lucky.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And going back to your question about the need, I think, we seem to have, we sort of seem to have a few months gap in between children. Shelley, my friend who does babies, doesn't often seem to have one, but the people that they desperately need are people who can take in older children or teenagers. That's not a space we're in yet. Our children are still much too young for us to think about it, but there's so much need in that space.
Okay.
But you can understand why. That's a whole nother kettle of fish. We took on 2 10-month-olds, and they can't do much at 10 months old. They are, you cuddle them, change their nappies.
They're dependent. They're not even walking at that stage.
Yeah, feed them and care for them. It's not rocket science. And even the 3-year-old that we did have was markedly more challenging than 2 10-month-old, and I can imagine based on the behaviour of our 7, 9 and 10-year-olds that have been brought up in a pretty stable environment. Having kids of that age and older that have had very troubled upbringings would be incredibly difficult. So you can see why a lot of people aren't putting their hands up to do that.
Yeah. Oh, difficult, very difficult. So how old were your own children when you first started?
I think when we signed up, Asher was around about 2. This is when we started the process. And so I think Asher was, actually Asher would have been around 2 when we had our first foster baby with us. That seems a long time ago.
So very, very young, really.
Really young, yeah.
Yes.
So you're
but
still sort of struggling with bringing your own kids up. Well, we would have been.
Yes. Yeah, I have a tendency to commit myself to things and then just deal with them when it happens. But yes, I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think I just go back to kind of almost that comment and why we got into it. It was not my idea. It never was. It was very much Judith's idea. And it was something that she thought that she, as she explained, could do. We had the capacity and thought, I can do that. And had the feeling that, it was probably a good thing to do, given that it was, not everyone can do everything. There's some things that, we aren't cut out to do in terms of helping the ecclesial community or the wider community. But that was just something that Judith thought that she could do. And then if she could do that, I couldn't. I think the word was come up with a reason why I could argue that it was a really bad idea and we shouldn't do it. It was like, no, actually, it probably is. If you're committed to be able to do the lion's share of it, which she has, it was like, that's something that I can support and do my bit as such.
And obviously, in any family situation, you're going to have a mum and a dad, and you are both part of it. Whether, when one person gets into it, when Judith's into it, you're obviously.
It does affect both, yes.
You're still the dad in the house, aren't you? Still the father.
Yeah, and that's what I've said before is once you have a child that's there and it needs caring for and looking after, then you just do it. So once you've made a decision that we're going to do this and a child turns up, when you arrive home from work, you just do it. So once you've made that decision, which is made in a rational state, without anything, then you are put in the situation where it's the heat of the moment and you just have to, and it's not actually hard in that sense because there's a living human being that you need to look after.
Yes. So you just said, you arrive home from work and there's a baby. How much notice do you get? Well, I mean, with a baby, you get sort of 9 months notice, but obviously with a foster child, it might be a little less than that.
Yeah, I think the most notice we've had was with our last wee boy, and I think we had a couple of days then. It was only because his transfer was slowed down. I think the quickest we've had was 6 o'clock that evening, and then an hour later, a wee girl turned up on our doorsteps, basically stark naked because she'd been in the bath when the police did a drugs raid on her home.
Wow.
Yeah, poor wee Dot. So she turned up. Basically, Orangatamariki had just been told this raid is happening and we suspect there may be children at the house, so they'd called us in advance to say, these are the children that we understand live there. Would we be able to place any with you if necessary? We said, yep, sure, okay, and turned up an hour later.
Wow. And how long did you have that young one for?
She stayed with us. I don't think it was quite 6 months. I think it was more like 5 months. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you get no chance to prepare or anything like that. You just dump straight into the deep end with it.
Yes.
And with no indication of how long it could be. Like they always say, it might be 5 days or something, but they have no idea because they went in like this case I think it was drugs, and do this and know that there could be children in the house and it's not suitable for them to be there, and then they take them out, and I don't think the police do it, and then Arama Tamariki come on board and go, okay, now we need to figure out if there's someone within the wider whānau that this child can go to. And in an ideal world, it's like, oh yeah, they've been uplifted, the parents were not suitable or in a really bad space at that time, and then they could go to grandma and granddad or auntie and uncle, and it could happen quite fast if they're stable members of society, and they can go there. But in all, well, two out of three cases, they really struggled to find suitable people within the family. And the first one did actually work almost like clockwork. It was they came to us, they did a thorough search and found it was a great aunt and great uncle that were very, very good. One of them was a teacher and one of them was something else, and they seemed to be in a very good position to be able to take on this child and some others, I think, his siblings, and that worked very well.
But even then, that took 4 months for them to organise. I think they struggled to find great aunt and uncle initially. You know, it never seems to happen quite as fast as you'd like it to.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
And I take it with the speed with which it happens when it does. You don't get a choice as to, you know, who you want or how long you want to have them or anything like that, do you? It's just...
No, but my social worker knows me quite well, and she knows our parameters. So we do only take younger children at the moment. We want them to be younger than our children, and so she's definitely asked a few times about older children when they've been struggling, but they're happy for you to decline. And again, if you choose to just take one particular gender in, that they know that, and know that if you take in little boys, they won't call you up about a little girl who needs a home. So they're pretty good at working with what works for you.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. So how did your own children cope with it? How did they deal with it?
They've had a variety of reactions. It's been very reflective of their own personalities, to be honest. The little girl we mentioned that turned up late one night, she was very close in age to Asher at the time that she came to us, and many people here met her. She had some really challenging behaviours. The poor wee dot, she was she'd had 3 years of she'd been bounced around a lot. I think she had been in 6 homes, you know, various homes before us. She'd been in foster care before and then bounced back to whānau care. And she worked out quite quickly that tormenting Asher was a very good way to get a reaction. And our Asher is hardly perfect, and his response tended to be to hit back. So, of course, you couldn't let go. So in some respect, that was definitely our hardest placement, and we learned our lesson firmly and clearly then that we needed a bigger age gap between our children and foster children that we take on. In other cases, it's been incredibly positive. Jacob really loves little children. He's always been very good with them, and particularly with our last wee boy, he had a really, really close relationship with him. They were just like 2 brothers, really, and to the point where I started worrying the other direction. I knew that he wouldn't be with us forever, and was really getting quite worried about what Jake's reaction was going to be when our little boy moved on. You know, it would be sort of like losing a brother, and at that point we didn't know what the plan was for him. We were hopeful that he'd be going to a lovely, safe, happy home, but we didn't know that for certain. And I don't know what I would have done if I was put in a position where I couldn't, hand on heart, tell Jacob that I knew our wee boy was somewhere safe and loved. Thankfully, we didn't end up there. He has moved to a lovely, lovely home, wonderful Christian family. We've met them. We've spent a lot of time with them. Jacob and their son get on very well, and Jake's coped with that transition a lot better than he could have. But it was definitely a concern for me at the time.
Yes.
Again, comes down to personality. Our Emily is very resilient, very happy to welcome children, and very resilient when they move. So she's never particularly given me worries. It very much depends on the children.
So how does that work for you? I mean, all of a sudden you're parents again to another child for who knows how long, somewhere between 2 days and 2.5 years or whatever. You're building a relationship, but you don't want to build it too far, or do you? How does building a relationship go with a child like that, where you don't know when D-Day is?
Yeah. Well, to some degree, it happens organically, because when you're learning about a child, even a little child like 10 months, like our last wee boy was when he moved to us, you're learning about them and they're learning about you, and we've just really kind of taken it as it comes and let it evolve organically. Oranga tamariki don't sort of encourage or disencourage you to avoid using, titles like mum or dad or something like that. I held back from that for a long time. I knew it was going to be very, very hard to say goodbye to a child who knew me as mum. And I think it was almost for myself more than anything that I didn't refer to myself as mum to our children. Our last wee boy, I didn't really have a hope anyway. He was learning to talk at our place, and I was mum as soon as he could talk, and it was fine. I kind of figure you can't welcome a child into your home and give them a loving home without loving them. And we've just worked with it.
Yeah. And I guess it helps to a certain extent, does it? Just knowing that these children are only temporary. So that there is a time frame around it, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and I think it's a very different scenario. I know a lot of people will go into fostering hoping for a permanent placement. Maybe they haven't been able to have their own children or something like that, and they're hoping that this will be forever. And I can only imagine the heartbreak that can cause when it doesn't end up being forever. Whereas we've always been very comfortable with the fact that we have a loving home for as long as they need it. And then when they're happy, when there is a permanent home for them to move to, they'll do that.
That's where they go. Yeah.
Do you keep contact with them once they've left your home?
That's one of the areas where I think Oranga tamariki could do better. In most cases, it doesn't seem to happen. I've been talking to them about that because that's really hard. You can't, like I said, you can't give a child a loving home without loving them. And then to never hear from them again, even if they've only been with you for 4 months, is really hard. Every time I see a chubby little boy about, I don't know, maybe about 5 now, walking down the street, I wonder if it's maybe our first little boy. He may not be chubby now. He was just a very, very chubby baby. And I would love to know. I was very comfortable with where he went. That was the great aunt and uncle, and it sounded like they were amazing people. I wish I knew where he was. And for different reasons, I wish I knew where the second little girl who stayed with us was, because I was very uncomfortable about the placement she went to. I said, she's welcome back. If it doesn't work, send her back here. She knows us. We'll look after her. But based on our experiences with Oranga tamariki, you absolutely couldn't count on them to send them back to the foster parents who had them previously. And so I'd love to know. I hope she's doing okay. But thankfully, with our last wee boy, he's moved to a permanent placement, and our two families had a lot to do with each other while we were going through the transition process. they live close to us. He comes around to visit. I know he's very, very happy with them, and we see plenty of him, and the plan is we'll be in his life forever. So that's
exciting.
Yeah, that's how
nice.
it should be. It really is.
Yeah. It is lovely. How do you get involved in this?
I just called up Oranga Tamariki and asked, how do I get involved in it? They sent us an awful lot of forms to fill out. Got a lot of references. If anyone's thinking about it, warn your referees in advance. I didn't really, and they have to do an awful lot of work, it turns out.
Okay.
No references, and then they do all the things that you'd expect them to do, checking a family to take in a child. So police checks, doctor's appointments, a very, very long interview where they ask you all kinds of personal questions, and a very thorough home check to check that your house, that they're comfortable, that your house is safe. So it takes a long time, but none of it's particularly challenging. It's just a lot of hoops to jump through.
So you say it took a long time. Oh, sorry, Paul.
I'd say, and some training. I can't remember that, but we went to a couple of days or something, and so jumping through hoops to make sure that the families that the state, I guess, is placing children in are as safe as they can deem from going through all of that process, so that there are less of the stories in the news of foster children being in bad places. It was pretty thorough.
So you said it takes time. What sort of time does that? What time did it take? How long did it take you? Is this a week or a couple of weeks? Or
no, I think we worked out it was a year from starting the process to getting approved. There were some reasonable gaps in between while they processed things. About a year later, and the minute we were approved, we got a call the next day, I think, about our first wee boy.
Oh, quick, approve them.
Basically.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So have you had any real highlights, like, of having a foster child, and, all of it, I don't know, a highlight where all of a sudden, here's this love or this breakthrough or something like that?
Well, with our last wee boy, it was more along the lines of raising one of your own children. There were countless highlights along the way. He's the most adorable wee child ever. You couldn't not love him. And so there's plenty of highlights there that I could talk about, but they would just sound very much like the highlights anyone would tell you about raising a baby. Thinking particularly in terms of fostering, the first wee boy we had, he came to us at 10 months old. We never did get much of his history, but my working theory is that he really had been left in his cot and given a bottle every time he squeaked, because he was a very, very big little boy. He was adorably cuddly. His muscle tone was absolute. He could hardly sit up. He was 10 months old. He couldn't crawl. He could hardly sit. You get a 10-month-old, and we sort of figured we'd give him breakfast. He didn't know what to do with solids. He just didn't have a clue. I think he had. Oh, and when I gave him his bottle, he wouldn't drink it if I was holding him. He didn't know what to do. You had to lie him on the ground and give him his bottle to hold, and then he understood he'd hold his bottle and he'd drink it himself. It was as if And so he went from, but he was beautiful. He just lapped up attention. Yeah, he loved just having someone talking to him and looking at him and smiling at him, and he just loved it. And we watched him grow in the time he was with us to crawling and walking and, growing into a more sensible shape, starting solids. He was just turning into a real little boy. And it was just so incredibly rewarding.
Yes.
And he was starting to interact, like to start with. It just was this kind of blank face, whereas after, it was pretty much right near the end, he started to kind of engage like a person, and crawl and move, and it was interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah,
Mm.
it's
And
isn't
he
it
was,
wonderful to be able to see that sort of thing?
Yeah, yeah.
So they will have come from challenging backgrounds. Do you see much challenging behaviour with the little ones?
It varies. Our first wee boy, his behaviour wasn't challenging as much as he just had so far he had to go, so much he had to learn. The little girl we've mentioned who was with us next, yes, she had all kinds of challenging behaviours. She was just a scared, confused little girl making her way in the world. You know, it's very hard you could never call the behaviour naughty. She just really, in her mind, she'd been happy with her daddy. And then in the blink of an eye, she'd been moved to our place, and she very much wasn't happy here. And as you would do if you were 3, blamed us entirely for the fact that she was here.
Yes.
And was basically just dealing with the world in the only ways she knew how, which definitely was interesting to work with.
Okay.
and she was, what was it, showing the classic, was it disjointed?
Disorganized attachment, yeah.
It was just incredible. Like, there was the one thing that I can remember us teaching us there was 4 different ways, I think it was, that they behave, and she was just textbook for this disjointed attachment. And it was interesting. She had just been to 3 years old. I think she'd been in control, left to herself to organise her life,
Yep.
and cook her toast and do whatever she needed to be done.
Wow.
And then to come to an environment where there were some rules, not everything went, and yeah, it was obviously a rather large shock to the poor wee thing.
Yeah.
And you could just see that she had been in a situation where she had to look after herself, and it was really challenging for her to adjust to the fact that she was in a family where we were starting to take the reins.
Yeah.
Mm.
So when you've got foster kids, just another question I've been quite interested in is are you allowed to take them to Sunday school or to do Bible readings with them, or say prayers, or if that's a natural part of your family, which I know it is, are you allowed to share that with them?
I can't recall ever being told that we weren't supposed to. So they have been just part of our normal family, as per what we do.
Yeah.
In pretty much every respect of how we live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know there have been cases where biological parents have been concerned about children attending church, for example, and they tend to, in those cases, well, they'll try and focus very much on what's best for the child, but in a transitional placement like ours, they probably would move the child at that point. But our experience has been, my social worker knows very much our lifestyle and that we go to church every Sunday and so on and so forth, and they've been very comfortable with that. Our last little boy's parents, actually, because he was with us so long, I had more to do with them, and they were actually very, very happy to hear that we were Christian.
Okay.
Which I liked. It was a connection with them. We didn't have a lot of similarities in life, but I was pleased that they were happy with that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So if anyone's thinking about being a foster parent, what does it take to be a foster parent?
It's a little like Paul was saying before, in terms of you just do roll with the punches. So you'd be surprised, it's never been any one big step. You just really have to be prepared to work with a very broken system, because sadly, Oranga Tamariki, though they've got wonderful caring people working there wanting to make a difference in the world, there's a lot of work that they need to do. There's a long way they need to go. So you have to be prepared to work with some very broken children in a very broken system, but it is incredibly rewarding. And the need is desperate. They really are, particularly for older children, desperate for people to love them.
And do you have to have children of your own to be in this position, or can childless couples also foster children?
Very much so. Yep, no, single people, childless couples. I think the main restriction they put on it is that they don't want people too young taking on foster children. I meant to check the age. I think it may be 24 or 25, that they like people to be older than. Although they're often flexible with that when it comes to whānau placements anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get checked up on, or the child gets checked up on a semi-regular basis, that they're doing okay?
To a degree. Technically, the social workers need to cite the child, and in our case, that was literally all they did. They would let the creche know that they were coming, and they would knock on the door and see the child and wave and leave.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a system.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and in our case, there would be nothing to find out, but I have often thought that it would be quite easy to miss something that way.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what about for those of us who haven't got, or are not fostering? What can we do anything to support or help, or is there anything specific we can pray about or anything like that?
I think the main thing, and it's been great in our ecclesia and in our family, in that it's just treat us and the foster child as they are a temporary addition to the family, to the ecclesia, to the Sunday school for a period of time, and just treat it like that. I think and that's been the case, and it's been great. In terms of support in that respect. And although, Judith might have something to add to that, particularly around the child turning up without 9 months preparation.
No, I would re-emphasize what Paul said, in that we've been very, very lucky with the people God has put in our lives. He came to us quite not long before Christmas, and so was at our place for our family Christmas. And we do very elaborate homemade presents, and my mum was, I don't know when she did it, but she whipped him up his own homemade present so that he wasn't left out when everyone else was opening something. We've just been very, very lucky, very blessed in terms of the family and ecclesia that we have around us, and it makes all the difference.
So good support.
Yes. And saying that it is like having, adding a new member to your family. I often think, it tends to be a big deal when someone has a baby, and I have to admit that I found it just the same when you have another child turn up on your doorstep. They may be a little older, but it's just as much of an adjustment. It doesn't disrupt your life less because you chose it, and you chose to be open to it. So all kinds of assistance are appreciated, and I have particularly. A lot of people have mentioned they've been thinking of me when our last wee boy moved, and I've really appreciated that because it's been a huge transition. It's hard,
Yes.
And especially it is not supposed to be 2.5 years. It is supposed to, ideally, it is 5 days, 2 weeks, 3 months to 6 months. So having 2.5 years and then moving on is more challenging, I think.
Yes. Do you get financial support for looking after children, for fostering?
Yes, you do. They phrase it as a reimbursement, that they, a fortnightly stipend, and we find that it covers most of your expenses for raising a child. There's not the extras in there, which, so we probably would have ended up just a little bit out of pocket, because obviously we'd want to treat the children we have in the same way we treat our own children. But it definitely covers the ins and outs of raising a child.
Right. Yeah.
So doctor's bills and, I don't know, kindy or creche or whatever, or
clothing.
Clothing and food.
Yep. Yep, no, absolutely. I never saw a crash bill. The bills were sent straight to Orangatamariki. When we went to summer school last year, they paid for our little boys. Well, we got him down there because it wasn't much extra, but our children flew back because it was our wedding anniversary and we spent a little bit longer down the South Island, and they paid for me and our little boy to fly up to Hamilton to drop him to his respite placement and for me to fly back down. They really do try to make it as easy as possible for you. It's occasionally you will hear it mentioned that people foster for money. That's not really actually feasible. You're never going to make money out of it, but you don't want for anything either.
Yeah, fair enough. What did you do? You mentioned your the first one arrived sort of with about an hour's notice with little or no clothing. How did you get on in that situation? Did clothing arrive with the child?
They did give us a warehouse voucher, but I'm quite sure at that point the warehouse wasn't open anyway. And we do try and keep a few spares of everything on hand just in case. I felt it was a bit of a touching moment. Like the poor Dot, she's 3 and she's in a new house and she has no idea what was going on. And the biggest problem in her mind is that the overnight nappies we had did not have the Little Mermaid on them, and it was tragic. And I could just understand exactly where she was. Her world has been turned upside down, and her nappies do not look the same.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
So did you get the right ones for the next night?
We worked on that. From what I remember, it was quite hard. I'm still not quite sure what she was looking for, but we found an alternative she was happy with. So
that's good. No want the wrong nappy.
It must be so traumatic for some of them, particularly the older ones. It must be so traumatic.
Oh, terribly
moving around from house to house, and just our hats off to you that you're willing to do this and open your homes to be a loving place, a loving, safe place for these children that have not known a great deal of safety, perhaps in their growing up lives,
I just want to say that I really loved how you phrased that, because that's one thing I meant to say and haven't so far, is that the parents, particularly of the children we've had, and I'm sure many, many more out there, can't give their children a safe home there. But without exception, in our case, they've loved them. They just haven't been well equipped to give them a safe home and care for them properly. And that's something that surprised me. You often think of children in foster care as unloved little children. Our children were just victims of terribly, terribly sad circumstances.
Yes, yeah.
And bad decisions, like the people involved generally made very bad decisions. It wasn't that they didn't love them, but they loved other things more, might be the way to put it, and were subsequently trapped in ways of living that were very hard for them to get out of.
Totally.
Oh, thank you so much for your time tonight. We've really enjoyed this conversation.
Been very eye-opening.
Yeah, very. You are doing an amazing job, and really pray that you keep up that work and that many others are blessed through it.